Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness But
But
Ours.
Welcome to part 2 of our deep dive into Richard Stanley's 1992 horror masterpiece, Dust Devil. You can find a link to part 1 in the description below. Now, without further ado, we continue our deep dive on No Darkness But Ours.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is Namibia as a war zone, and a war zone that has just become not a war zone anymore.
yes,
Namibia is a border. Certainly Bethany. Bethany is a border town, and Namibia is seen as a border. It's a place that's in flux. It's
yes,
in change, and so it's perfect for something like the Dust Devil.
and in many ways, the Dust Devil has the feel. Dust Devil has the feel of a western.
Yes.
There's Hitch's appearance. There's Simon Boswell's theme. Even when he arrives in Bethany, he's coming on this big old sort of steam train to this old station with "Pray for Rain" lettered on the roof, and an old creaking sign saying "Bethany" swinging from it, and he trudges through the station in his warm boots with his coat flapping around him and his hat. But
Have you been in the war, man? I've seen things. I've seen things you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
He's talking to two soldiers who I believe are the soldiers in the tank at the end.
Yeah, that would make sense. But interesting thing about, thinking about the Western, the whole thing of the frontier West, it's a liminal space. It's a place that's in the process of being in inverted commas civilized by the white men, and so
turning from one thing to another.
But it's all about this kind of narrative. It's essentially, I suppose, in many ways, a colonialist narrative of here come the civilized white men to tame the land, bend it to their will.
But Joe Neiman knows that the land is always going to be the land. It's always going to be there. You can't tame the desert. The desert is eventually going to drive you out.
And that's what it means. That in many ways, Dust Devil is a kind of an inverse Western, because the process we're seeing in that is going in the opposite direction. The white men are fucking off back to where they came from in the first place. The desert is reclaiming the places that they created out of it. It's reclaiming Bethany, and of course, the final showdown happens at the town of Colemanskop, which is a real life location, an abandoned mining town that's been half swallowed under the desert sands. And of course, the other thing, crucially, is that the indigenous culture of that land, which is not, whereas in the Western, it's, until the revisionist Westerns came along at least, was usually portrayed as kind of like barbarous, bloodthirsty superstition that needs to be, that will be dispelled by the cold light of reason and Christianity. Whereas in fact, no, it's actually implied that culture has actually got a better understanding of reality than your Western materialism.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, again, the inversion would be that the occupying South African people are the barbarians. They're the people who, just blew in from nowhere and, tried to impose their will on a place that did not want them at all. And anything that they made is being subsumed by sand. Anything that they contributed has just fucked things up.
There's an interesting parallel, in fact, if you've read Richard Stanley's production diary of Dust Devils. He had a relationship during the course of the making of the film with, it was Deborah Dietz, who was, I think she was Chelsea Field's body double.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
But towards the end, they're basically the last two people left on the film. I think the last thing they shoot is what's supposed to be the scene with the Dust Devil and Wendy when they're standing on the big cliff over the river. And they didn't actually have the actors available, so they filmed them. They dressed Deborah Dietz up in one thing and some other guy up in something else, and kind of like shot that big aerial shot, and that's the last thing. But he's left alone with her, and she talks about how he discovers that basically her family were originally Germans. Her grandfather was a Nazi war criminal who'd been involved in the manufacture of Zyklon B. But she and her father became a sort of fairly important movement in the South African power company. But she talks about she plans dreams of a career in a state-owned broadcasting station. Her dreams get out of hand, and she tells me her vision of a new South Africa. The right-wingers are planning to reclaim this part of Namibia and build a huge wall out into the ocean to divert the Benguela current and cause a temperature inversion to bring rain to the wasteland and make the desert fertile, so that the new pure white nation of Orandia, I think she calls it, can be founded. I shake my head and tell her that she's insane. I tell her that the white man will never be able to bind the desert to his will. The sleeping giants of the wasteland will awaken and break their bones if they try.
Yeah. And, okay, so two things about that. The first one is that you always have to remember about Stanley, and I love Stanley, but he's nuts. He's really crazy, and he's self-mythologizing. Everything is built on self-mythologizing, and it makes sense because one of the first things that you learn about Richard Stanley is that he's actually related to the Stanley of Stanley and Livingston.
Yeah,
like directly related. He's directly descended from him, So he has this background in anthropology and mythology, and he wants to make everything into a story, and he wants to be the main character of that story. Yeah. I mean, Hitch is literally based on him wandering through Namibia during the war.
But also he claims anyway, based on this.
Yeah, he claims that he did that. And the fact is that he always wears that hat, and he always wears like a long coat.
Yeah.
The same way that the character at the beginning who's picking through the desert in Hardware is also based on him.
Who was played by Carl McCoy,
exactly.
lead singer of Fields of the Nephilim, which Stanley did a few music videos for, and whose whole aesthetic, whose whole look was always derived from Italian spaghetti westerns, long coat.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's all this stuff underneath the skin of Dust Devil, which I noticed a really interesting thing in the first murder scene, the first murder sequence this time around, which is that at one point Hitch is like looking in the mirror and playing with his knife, and you can see what seems to be another version of him sitting behind him, and I swear to God that's Richard Stanley.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, sitting behind him in the corner in shadow, and I swear to God that's Richard Stanley. Now, is that a fuck up? Or is that, or is that intentional? It's really difficult to tell. But yeah, Richard Stanley is very invested in this story, and that's one of the things that spoke to me so much when I first saw it. So yeah. You're right. Anything that Richard Stanley says, you have to kind of take with a grain of salt. But Richard Stanley is also utterly involved in every frame of that film.
Yeah.
And even the accidents are maybe not so much accidents. Even the extreme chaos and weirdness of the film shoot is maybe not so much,
he would probably see. He's very much got the mentality of he would see some kind of pattern or design or some kind of higher power kind of getting involved.
It's a feature, not a
bug.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug. Yes, go back and take a look at it.
Yeah, I'm gonna rewatch this film again.
I mean, and that's one of the things that one of the things I love about the film. The film rewards rewatching. Now, I originally saw it in the theater. In its first cut, and when the Weinsteins saw the initial cut, that like the work print, I guess that Stanley had done, because they are credited as co-producers, so exec producers of Dust Devil. And they did what they usually did with things like Dust Devil, which is essentially they threw it down a hole, but because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. I don't know what the fuck they thought it was going to be. I mean, it is literally an art house horror movie.
Yeah.
If that's what you thought you were getting, that's what you got.
I know what I know that I don't know what Richard Stanley's had to say about Weinstein, but I know that I am friends with Simon Boswell on Facebook, which is like we're not worthy kind of thing. But he did when all the scandals broke about Harvey Weinstein. He basically said it's not news. A lot of us have, and he consistently referred to him as Harvey Wankstein, which I think sounds like a fair assessment of the man's character.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's about Weinstein for a long time in terms of how they would bastardize films that they distribute through Miramax, especially foreign language ones or
foreign language ones and genre ones. And one of the biggest things that they obviously did when they took a look at the first print was to go, this needs a lot more explanation. This needs a lot more, it's like, because no one is going to, no one who doesn't have the background that Richard Stanley does is going to be able to understand what the fuck is going on in some of these cases. And, we were talking about this a little bit before we started, recording. And, I was like, well, and I do, but I understand that decision. It's like, I was able to look at it and go, oh no, that totally makes sense. It makes sense mythologically. It makes sense in terms of black magic. It makes sense in terms of certain types of psychology. I love the anthropological stuff. I love that sense of being somewhere that maybe doesn't even exist beyond this moment. It is foreign to you as a watcher. But that maybe beyond the moment during which the film was being made, none of the things that you see on screen are still there, except perhaps the tops of the buildings in Kolmanskop. Yeah, and okay, so one of the biggest things that they did, as I recall, is that they laid in a lot of narration by Joe Niemand, and I'm fine with that, because that guy's got a great voice, and and it makes it more like a book. It makes it more literary,
And there's also, I mean, in the beginning, it's the kind of, he's laying down that initial mythology, and then the closing narration is kind of like, the desert knows her name now. He has stolen both her eyes. When she looks into a mirror, she will see his spirit like a shore at us, and her shoulders haze. Beyond the dim horizon, a tapestry of unfolding of all the avenues of evil and all of history set ablaze. I mean, it's just fantastic. Yeah. The actual dialogue of it is
for me.
It's coming out of myth at the beginning, and then back into myth at the end.
Back into myth at the end, because Supra remains a myth. Supra remains a demigod.
Yeah,
a man who made himself into a demigod, and what is it? I'm a man who. I'm an insect who dreamed he was a man, but now the insect is awake.
Yes.
And, and the point is that his yearning, his hunger, his inability to accept has made him into a god for a millennium of colonialism and excoriation. He is the god of the century that we are about to embark on.
And who thrives in that sort of spiritual void that's so much of that world exists in. At one point, Joe Niemand calls him a leech is going fat on the world's pain.
Yeah, he's a predator. He's he's a shrike. He's a god that gives nothing back. He's a vulture. He's a snake.
It just occurred to me as well, because there's a power. I mean, you noted various parallels with Richard Stanley between his, but there's another thing as well, which is that he constantly, he says, he has all these stories that he tells about, how he give his life for a quiet corner of this, or how he loves Wendy, blah blah blah. He tells lots of stories to explain who he is and why he does what he does, but ultimately, you can never really know how much truth is in any of them.
Yeah, and I don't think he knows. I don't think he knows.
Yeah, and there's possibly another parallel with Richard Stanley there.
Yeah, he's the Dust Devil is empty inside, obviously. He's a roaring, rolling column of dust. You know, and he scars the world. He descends on the world to scar it. And one of the things that I miss about that first cut is it ends on Wendy putting her hand up to stop the tank, and we see her from the back, and it's almost Tiananmen Square-ish image.
Yeah, and I remember getting that vibe as well.
Yeah, and we hear Joe Neiman say, "The Dust Devil must keep on moving forever, without rest or pity."
Wow. Yeah, that worked. I could imagine that working very well as an ending as well. Yeah. I wouldn't want to lose that final narration that we have now, because that is
absolutely. I mean, all the narration was great, and it's great, particularly because of John Matsukeisha.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Also, of course, it featured the brilliant and sadly lost far too early William Hootkins. Who also plays a completely different character in Haro. He plays one of the most memorably repulsive characters ever in Haro, and he plays as a halfway sympathetic and decent South African copper in this. I mean, the other South African, the ones who are under Zix McKay's characters, are venal, stupid, brutal, corrupt. And those are their good qualities.
Contemptuous.
Yeah. Absolutely. I will always remember the one they actually find they find a severed hand, hanging outside, and one's like, "Oh, great!" and he's kind of like grabbing it, get the wristwatch off, and it's like,
yes,
it's like,
call Ben, tell him we found something here, man.
Yeah, the real absolute,
they're grotesques. They're absolutely grotesque.
You need to evolve a couple of you and me. We are not the same species right now. You need to evolve a couple of evolutionary fucking rungs.
Yeah, and I think that people have reacted badly to that as well. It's like, why are all the white people various sketches of clueless doofy? And I'm like, what else are they going to be?
The situation is very, very hard for them to be. I mean, the bit where you have, her husband on his kind of like desperate quest to kind of find his wife, and in a different narrative, he would have been
the hero. Yeah, and he thinks of himself as the hero. Absolutely,
he's on a love quest in many ways. Of course, he goes yomping into this bar full of black people, and he's a South African. He's got a picture of him in his old army uniform, and then and of course, one of the people who starts beating him up
is the guy who got beaten up for.
We were watching it before, because there's the black guy who helps dig Chelsea Field's car out when it gets dug in, and she just actually reverses out and just drives away, damn near runs him. And Kay was like, "How fucking rude!"
How fucking rude to this guy comes to you as a witness and you beat him up.
Yes,
to make sure that he wasn't lying?
Well, just because he's a black guy, and so we're just gonna. And of course, I think there's an assumption as well that's from those white South African cops that whoever did that to Satya at the beginning. It's obviously the black boys have come and carved up a white woman kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. They talk about, terrorists. It's like, I think this was done by terrorists.
It's like, he was given half the chance kind of thing. And and they are rightly told to, they're a pair of fucking morons. And to be fair, William Hukins' character is like, you are a pair of fucking idiots, and what you
get the fuck out.
Is help, you dicks, So they're played.
And Ben continues to call them a fucking pair of morons, like almost every time he meets them, and they kind of play it off. They kind of like, oh, Ben, we all know you're not really a black fella.
Yes, what else are they going to do? Because otherwise they're basically two white guys raised in this highly racist culture who are in a position where they are forced to take orders from a black guy, including letting the black guy call them a pair of fucking knobheads if he wants to.
Absolutely. So,
punch them in one.
So, he goes into this bar, and they try real hard to not have to beat him up. They try real hard. It's like, I always love the barman going like, you should go out and go to the other door, the white bar, because...
Well, ironically, if he'd gone there, he would have probably found out more, because one of the whole things, there's that whole misunderstanding is that there's the pinball machine, which was playing in the white bar when he leaves a message on his answering machine that's in the background. But by the time he's got there, it's actually been moved because that bar's shutting down basically to the black people's bar over the road.
Yeah, exactly.
But he very sort of kicks off and says, "Why won't you bloody help me?" And very, very quickly gets the shit beaten out of him.
Yeah. Mainly by the guy who got beat up for just seeing his wife.
Yes.
It's like, I saw your fucking wife.
To come in here, my bruises are just healing up here.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Serious aggression to vent.
Yeah, and there's this real undertone with the bartender who's like, why would you expect your wife to have come in here?
Yeah.
Why would you think that? Why would you ever think that?
Yeah.
You're from South Africa, man.
It's not so. I mean, it's not something which would, it's probably again until very recently where even admitting you'd seen the missing white lady would get you in a shitload of trouble, as the guy who helped dig her car out could testify. Yeah. But of course, there's also this whole kind of thing where things have just shifted, and it's actually, you know what, mate, we don't have to take shit from you anymore if we don't want to, and we don't want to.
Exactly.
So exactly. Mark, meet the floor. Meet Mark.
Mark Robinson.
Yeah.
Hello, Robinson House. Yeah. I mean, there's so much love in this film. There is so much to love in this film. Absolutely. And again, that layering, it's like layering of politics, layering of anthropology, layering of history, layering of mythology, layering of, and the scenes are very short. They're very sketchy. They're very like, whoop, I hope you were paying attention, because, I'm not gonna fuck around. We're moving forward. We have to keep moving forward, and that too, I think, is something that the Weinsteins, and indeed everybody who blundered into Dust Devil, found difficult to take at the time.
Yes, you can see it very much not be. I mean, it's a film very much born out of the 90s, but also a film that would have kind of fallen on stony ground in many ways in the 90s, where people were not looking for, they were, if they were, to the extent they were looking for horror, were looking for horror of a fairly, not cozy exactly, but one of a fairly, which gave you a fairly straightforward model.
I think I've spoken before about the fact that when Candyman came out, it took a lot of shit for being legitimately invested in trying to scare you and to make a political statement and to not laugh at itself.
Yeah, unlike Scream, which was, I mean, I remember an article when the Blair Witch Project came out about how, so talking about Scream and how, Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter, loves scary movies so much that he wrote a screenplay called Scary Movie, which is actually the original title.
Yes.
For the parodies of it came out, which were called Scary Movie. But he said, it was very clever, it was self-referential, it was witty, it was blah, blah. Just one problem, it forgot to be scary. Which is maybe a bit harsh, which is maybe a little bit...
Yeah, that's super harsh, actually, because Scream, the original Scream, is scary. It's scary to think that your friends want to kill you.
Oh, God,
it's scary to think that, that your boyfriend could stab you to death when you're stuck in a dog door.
Yeah.
The actual awful things that happen in Scream are genuinely awful.
Oh, they are.
Because there's a lot of jokes. People, there's, I remember when Candyman came out, somebody, some asshole from the Times said, they really missed an opportunity by not putting the Candyman can on the soundtrack. And I was like, fuck you. And then when Jordan Peele obviously read that review, because when, the more recent version of Candyman, the reboot came out, it literally begins with that song and inverts it immediately. It's like, guess what? Even if I had put the Candyman can in this movie, it would still not be funny because lynchings aren't funny.
Yeah, I mean, I really like all three of the films, all three of the features that Jordan Peele has made. I mean, obviously, Get Out drew the most attention, and I think certain people have been kind of falling over themselves to indicate he's a one-trick pony, or that is, or of course, people wouldn't make this fuss if he wasn't black. Oh, fuck off, you wankers! I think
absolutely.
Us, I think, got kind of overlooked in many ways because of the. As the kind of the follow up to Get Out, but I think Us is brilliant, and Nope. I mean, I spent a long time trying to work out. You spend quite a while trying to work out what exactly is going on here.
Yeah.
And then when you do, and it's actually, oh my God, this is fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And there's so much going on in that as well, and I think.
Yeah, so much going on in all three, and again, it's like this is a movie made by a smart man who expects you to keep up. Keep up. It's a guy who's very literate within his genre. He has a vocabulary, which dates back a long way and reminds me of Scorsese. Scorsese, who will say, I mean, and again, I think I've said this before. At the back of the production book for Gangs of New York, which I have because I love that fucking film. There is a list of all the films that he saw before he made it and took stuff from. Yeah. And he's like very overt about it. He's like, it is not stealing. It is showing your work. Yeah. This is my work.
The idea that, I mean, the whole kind of idea of postmodernism that you can't do anything original, that everything is no, fuck off. This is art has always worked by you learn as an artist by looking at what other artists have done and deciding finding what you like, what you don't, what you love, what you hate, and looking at something. I want to achieve the same thing in my work that did for me when I saw it, but maybe differently, like if in the case of Lovecraft, without being a racist arsehole, if humanly possible, and so on and so forth. It's always about building, it's that whole standing on the shoulders of giants thing. If you're going to work in any field, you should know its history. You should see what's gone before, and you should.
Yeah, but a lot of people at the time thought that they were too good for that.
Yeah.
They were too good, even if they were making a horror movie. It was one-off. It was a joke. They were too good to have actually watched horror movies.
for so long, it was genre stuff, horror, of course, in particular, was seen as, it was seen as shite. So, I mean, we've all had this thing of, you say horror and people will think of the most lowest common denominator, video nasty gore fest, which is just about, cheapo gore effects and very, very, and tits and very little else. Mm-hmm. But of course, good horror has a much wider appeal than that. If people, if people actually realise that's, or people just, that's horror. Well, I do like that. But as well, to do it well, like with the original film of The Haunting, requires, a director with, requires good actors, a script written with intelligence and depth, a director with sensitivity to nuance and to character and performance. And all too often, because that kind of you get that ghettoized mentality, and so a lot of the time, only it doesn't attract the kind of talents it actually needs to make it good, and it becomes a kind of for a very long time we've had this kind of self-perpetuating narrative of horror is shit, and of course, if something does happen to get produced that is good, it's like, well, it can't be horror then.
Yes, yeah. Kind of elevated horror, baba. The thing is that with Dust Devil, there is a sense of elevation, which is kind of interesting because, yes, there are moments of extreme grand guignol. There are moments of grotesquerie. There are moments of satire. There are moments of, political commentary. But there are moments of beauty, and that beauty is epic. It is numinous. It reminds me of Peter Weir, so it's sort of like Peter Weir and Cronenberg had a baby, except it wouldn't be Cronenberg because Cronenberg, Peter Weir and Clive Barker had a baby.
That sounds more like it.
Yes. And it's poetry. It is actual poetry. And it's, I understand that it's weird to say that, something that has a Roadrunner joke in it is poetry, or something that, and the Roadrunner joke begins with two people on holiday with their kids in the back, all screaming at each other. Running headlong into a truck that is taking a load of
cows to
the slaughterhouse, and the cows are and the cows are there's something wrong with the cows, like they're mutated or something like that. Because it literally says abnormal on the side of the truck. It's like, these cows don't work anymore. We gotta kill them. And the cows kind of blunder out into the desert. One of them gets killed in the explosion, and Hitch comes walking out of the explosion, stepping across a charred cow skull. I understand that it's weird to call a movie that has that in it a tone poem, but it is a tone poem, and it is a piece of poetry. And the poetry is visual, the poetry is auditory, the poetry is just inherent in the material, and it's everything from Joe Niemand snapping his fingers and all the lights come on at his oh God, and saying, it's like talking about the last double bill.
Oh yes, the bird with crystal plumage and the 7 golden vampires.
Yes.
I remembered it well.
That was a really good double. You're like, that would be a really good double. But it presumes that you understand why that's funny.
Yes. That's Argento. Is that Argento?
Yeah, Crystal Plumage is Argento, and Run Shaw produced The Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires.
Yeah, that was not
which is a crossover with Hammer. It's a crossover between Hong Kong and Hammer.
Yes, they were trying to kind of tap into the Bruce Lee fandom.
Yeah, that's right.
I've got to see just to watch that.
It's a crazy fucking film. It's nuts.
If only they could have got Cushing and or Lee involved.
Oh, they did. They did. Cushing's in it. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Cushing plays Van Helsing in it. It's not the original Van Helsing. It's one of his descendants. And he is traveling through China with his son, who provides even younger Van Helsing vibes, and is involved in the final wrestling match with the 7 golden vampires because because Cushing can't do that, obviously.
Yeah. I'm really too old for this shit.
Yes. No, so I mean, I'll show up for a while, but then I have to go back home.
And you can hear the conclusion of our deep dive into Richard Stanley's 1992 horror masterpiece Dust Devil at the same time next week. This episode of No Darkness But Ours was made possible through generous donations from subscribers like you. If you enjoyed this episode, tell all your friends and let us know in the comments. Let us know too if there's anything you'd really like to hear us talking about in the future, and we'll be back with more at the same time next week.
So, this has been No Darkness But Ours. I remain Gemma Files, and
I think I'm still Simon Bestwick, but yes, this was quite definitely No Darkness.
But Ours.